This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee to talk about the mid-season. I don't know how else. It's not a mid-season finale, but it's the mid-season of season 2 of Star Wars: The Bad Batch. 2 spectacular episodes. We've got 3 spectacular guests that are going to join us on Coffee with Kenobi. First, we're going to bring in my returning guest co-host for all episodes of Star Wars: The Bad Batch, Mr. Mason Zaire. Hello, Mason.
Hello.
How's it going, pal?
Great.
Great.
Excited for the Super Bowl.
Good. I know you're excited for the Super Bowl. Mason's name on the call tonight is Patrick Mahomes is in the Super Bowl, and there are multiple exclamation points. You are fired up.
There's one exclamation point.
Is there just one? It looks like 2 from mine. Oh, the L.
There's an L and those are...
I don't have my dad glasses on, apparently. That's all right. That's all right. We're going to bring in our other guests now. First, returning guest, and this person is no stranger to Star Wars fans. She's one of the most respected and well-known fans in fandom, and now she's showing up on podcasts all over the place. She's hard to keep track of. Just open up a podcast. You'll hear the one and only Mary Perdue. Mary, welcome back to the show.
Well, hello, Dan. I'm not quite sure that's true, but it does seem like I've been on a few more than normal lately.
Hey, from a certain point of view, right?
Exactly.
Very good. Well, we have one more guest. This is his first time on a podcast, so we are honored to have him. This is Mary's son, Mr. Chazz Perdue. Chazz, welcome to Coffee with Kenobi.
Glad to be here.
It's good to have you, my friend. You and I with our, your hair is much longer than mine, but you and I need to obviously cosplay as a Jedi and Padawan, I think.
Yeah. I've got my Jedi robes in my closet.
So we're ready. We're ready to go, which we'll certainly consider on the Halcyon, which we'll talk about a little bit later. As for now, we've got 2 episodes. We've got The Clone Conspiracy, and we've got Truth and Consequences. These are episodes 7 and 8 of Star Wars Season 2, The Bad Batch. Now, I'd considered doing individual shows for each of them, but I don't think I want to do that. I want to combine them together, just like Disney Plus and Lucasfilm did with these 2 shows. However, I think because they're so different in tone, we're going to talk about them. We're going to try to talk about them separately, one before the break and one after the break. So first, do the Clone Conspiracy. And Chazz, why don't we start with you? We'll save letter grades for the end, but tell me one word to describe the Clone Conspiracy for you and your overall thoughts on this episode.
A word for the clone.
If you want, you can marinate on it, and we'll have Mary go first. Or do you think you can?
Revelation.
Revelation. I love that. Tell us about your thoughts on the episode.
By itself, it's a really good episode because we're really starting to see more clones kind of wake up from
their weird Order 66 stasis.
Yeah, like the weird kind of like veil over their eyes of that order. Mm-hmm. It was already good to see that with Cody earlier, but getting to see more clones, it's good.
I like it. All right. Mary, what about you? What word would you use?
Surprising.
Tell us why.
I think it was surprising because of what Chazz just said, that finally we are seeing the clones wake up, like Rex said at one point in one of the shows, that the clones are figuring out that maybe being just a good soldier is not, following orders is not what they need to do. So, yeah, a little surprised that we are now getting into that realm.
Oh, very good. Very good. Yeah, and there is certainly plenty to dissect in not only this episode, but both of them. Mason, it is your turn. What's the word you would use, and overall thoughts on the episode?
My word would be mysterious.
Okay.
because you're trying to figure out who this like assassin bounty hunter is. And then like you're trying to figure out about the attack on Camino. And then everybody keeps saying different things, and then in the second episode it adds on.
That's true. And we will certainly get to that as well. So all very interesting words. My word for this episode of The Clone Conspiracy is Hitchcockian. This very much reminded me of an Alfred Hitchcock film as far as suspense. It was very much kind of paced as a thriller. The Bad Batch is nowhere in this episode, just like they are not in the second one, The Solitary Clone. And that was great because I very much felt like I was watching a lost episode of Star Wars, The Clone Wars, because it fit in perfectly. The animation, the pacing, and again, the mystery that was very much rampant throughout the entire thing. It was very, I mean, I could easily say it was delicious because it was just so savory. It was just a terrific episode. So at the beginning of this, we're returned to the clone bar that we've seen in Star Wars, The Clone Wars. Slip and Cade are talking, and we learn that there is some dissension amongst the clones, and they've certainly been sort of left out of favor. Chaz, I know you're a big fan of clones. Tell me sort of your impressions of Slip and Cade and this dilemma that they find themselves in.
Well, having, just not just on Order 66, but it's still being in the grand scheme of things fresh. I like that like I said, they're finally kind of coming to senses, their original senses of how they were in the Republic. And I like how it portrays them, even though they're clones and they still feel that sense of duty. Some of them are trying to stay alive by withholding information and not speaking their minds, like Slip, or wanting to act on that impulse to do justice like Cade and try and bring to light misdeeds.
Right. And I like how you said that, misdeeds, because there's a quote that says, "We aren't bad men, but what we did was wrong." And I don't know about any of you, but it always it's confused me, and I know that they haven't addressed it. I hope they will address it, but it's hard to tell if the chips for Order 66, do they malfunction? Do they have a short expiration date? Did a number of people get them removed? I don't think that's the case, because it would kind of take away from the drama of when the Bad Batch gets theirs removed and things of that particular nature and direction for the plot. But it's a little bit gray about, and I think it's even referenced, isn't it, Mason? Did they say something about a change in their tactics or something like that? Anybody write anything down, or do you know what I'm talking about?
I think they do, but I didn't write down.
Yeah, did anybody?
I didn't write anything down either, but I'm like you, Dan. I think that something has changed. Whether the effect of the chip is no longer as strong as it was at Order 66, hence the term that Rex used later on about his clone brothers waking up to what's going on. I'm not sure. It is very gray. I think they're not explaining that, and it may be for a reason that they're not explaining it, or maybe we'll get it later. I don't know.
I don't either, and I'm scouring over my notes, but I can actually read them for the first time. Mason, you'll be proud of me. And I don't have anything about it. I know that there's a defense recruitment bill that is being spearheaded by Rampart, and basically the premise here is, you know what, the clones have had their day. We're going to do something new because we need to keep the galaxy. I think they use the word strong. Like you said, we need to keep the galaxy strong, which I think is a really weird term to say when you're in a time of peace. I'm trying to relate that to modern history, specifically American history, because I know that a little bit better than other parts of the world, unfortunately. But they keep emphasizing that. So this is like the new direction that they want to take stormtroopers and create a new army. Now, Mesa and I were joking, and I'm sure many fans have thought of this too. Clones are pretty good shots. Stormtroopers aren't. So why is there this big push? But I digress. So where do we want to take this episode? I don't necessarily want to go through it linearly, but there's a lot of great things that happen. I think one of my favorite sequences is when Senator Churchy is there. She is from season 1 of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, but of course she's much older now. And she is very much an advocate for the clones. She goes in to try to talk to them about what is going on in this bar. And we are informed that all the clones have been either reassigned, missing, or dead. She wants to advocate for them. And I never thought about the idea that clones, I mean, we just assume they were phased out and the stormtroopers take over. I think that is what a lot of people think. But I really like this idea of the fact that the clones aren't represented in the Senate and what that is saying about how they are treated. Does anybody want to comment on that, or do we have another direction you'd like to go?
Are you sure you can read your notes?
I'm positive.
Because it's Chuchi, not Churchy.
Okay, I can't read my notes.
Well, I think part of the issue with the clones not being represented is they're never thought of as people. Even though we think of them as people, we got to know them during the Clone Wars animation, but I don't think anybody else really. I don't think the Senate, the people who are in quote unquote charge, they thought of them as individuals, thought of them as you would someone from Alderaan or Corellia or any other planet. They were made to be soldiers, and that's just what they think of them as being soldiers. So Chuchi thinking about them as being individuals, I think, is probably not the norm, and she is in the minority with that. And it's great that someone at least is thinking about them and willing to fight for them.
That's right, and very much so, unabashedly, without any kind of reservations or passive aggressive. She's just very forward on that. In Truth and Consequences, it is mentioned that the clones are thought of as military assets. So you're an asset. You're not a person. You're not an entity. You're not. I mean, Dave Filoni has said before that he thinks clones have souls, and I think most of us, I would think most people would agree with that, but obviously not the Empire. There are a lot of great callbacks. Before we move on, Chaz, anything you want to say about that?
I guess all I can really say is they're definitely, like my mom said, they're definitely just viewed as assets or tools of war. And it's a narrative thing. I like it when it's used as a narrative device in shows like this, because there's another show called Mobile Suit Iron-Blooded Orphans, in which they're not clones, but they are orphans, and they are viewed the exact same way. And then there are people who, like Chuchi, are advocating for their rights. So,
yeah, absolutely. And rights and responsibilities are a big part of this. And Mason, just so you know, I can read my notes. I actually wrote Churchy. I wrote Chuchi and Churchy. Apparently, I thought of them as synonyms. So there you are. So what do we want to talk about with this episode specifically? I think the most important part is this idea of clones as an asset versus an individual with rights and privileges, and why aren't they represented in the Senate? I'm also ashamed to admit I never thought about that before either, but I think it's the way they were presented. I'm not sure, but where do we want to take this? Mason, what would you like to say about this episode?
Back to what we were just talking about. Chuchi said the clones are not droids to be shut down.
That's a very important topic. Why did you write that down?
Because it's important that, like you said, they actually have souls.
Right.
They aren't just things to play with.
Right, and that's been talked about a lot in this season. I know it was Cody, right, in the Solitary Clone that talked about, the idea of good soldiers following orders, but unlike battle droids, we can actually think for ourselves. And I think that's a pretty neat little thing. Mary, anything you want to talk about for this episode specifically?
Well, I'm glad we brought Bail Organa back in, and that he is there supporting Chuchi. He probably has a little bit more gravitas in the Senate than, or at least we think of, because we are more familiar with him. We see him more. So it seems like for him to be supportive of Chuchi and be supportive of the clones, that gives it a little bit more importance along the way. And when his little R2 droid rolled in, I looked at Chaz and went, "Is that R2D2?" And then we saw the covering, the collaring, went, "Oh no, that's a different one." But it's like, your brain instantly goes to R2D2 with that. But in both shows, it was nice to see Bail show up. And then one other thing that I thought was very interesting, when Rex takes the assassin to the garage, and he says, we need to go to somewhere that's a little more quiet or more private to interrogate the assassin. And he mentions that the garage belongs to a couple of his friends. I know you don't like to speculate, but are we not thinking that is the Martez sisters' garage?
That's not even speculating. It says it on StarWars.com.
Oh, was it? Okay, so
Yep.
I didn't look. Okay.
No,
All
you're
right.
you're just very insightful. See, that's why people keep having you on their podcast, Mary.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yes, and that's exactly what it is. They on StarWars.com, they have the episode guides for season 2 up, and they haven't been up for a while, but now they're up. And that is one of the things that they mention. It is the Martez sisters, because we know that they have been working with Rex on occasion. So very good eye. Chaz, anything you want to bring up on this episode?
Definitely the line from Chuchi when they're in the bar and she's like, "What then when you're too old to fight?" Because it's something that never really gets brought up about the clones too much, unless it is in that, I think it was Kenobi, that brief scene where you see a clone in the alley. Of course, in Rebels with Gregor, Wolf, and Rex, and then in the one episode of the Clone Wars with the deserter and his family. We never really see clones outside of fighting. It's always they're doing what they were always meant to be doing, being a soldier. So I thought it was interesting that finally brought that question again. It was like, what are all of these clones going to do once they're phased out?
So one of the, is it Rex maybe? No, it's one of the clones says, when it says, what happens when you're too old to fight, when Chuchi says that, and the clone says, that's not a scenario that we are trained for, that we were trained for. So it brings some interesting questions about how we define ourselves as people, as individuals. So is it because of training? Is it because of the inner workings in your DNA, or is it because of how everybody perceives you? Right? Those are 3 different ways that the clones are viewed, whether within themselves and then within their brotherhood or through the galaxy itself. Because when it's brought up that they don't have representation, everyone seems a little thrown by that. I mean, again, I know I was thrown by that. And I really like kind of changing gears a little bit. This idea of what are you fighting for, who are you fighting for, and why are you fighting for it? And eventually that starts to become fleshed out because Rex shows up. And one of the reasons I called this Hitchcockian is there are a number of sequences where someone's just around the corner, someone's just about to show up. And in my mind, I'm thinking, is Rex going to show up? Is Ahsoka Tano going to show up? Right? And I didn't even think about the fact that it would be Bail Organa that you mentioned before, Mary. This is the first time that we've seen an animated Bail Organa in the Bad Batch. So that was cool to see. And of course, he would be someone that would be right there ready to fight. And he's very, very clever in how he does things. But one of the things that we learned, I want to bring this up too. Organa starts to say, you know what, Tipocha City survived for thousands of years with all kinds of epic storms, and then suddenly it's wiped off the map. It's very suspicious, but the Empire casts such a massive shadow, and I feel like we say this a lot, that everyone is afraid. Mason, how often do you see, in the Bad Batch, would you say fear is an important part of what the Empire does?
Very.
Yeah. Can you think of any examples from this episode that really shows that?
I think when like all of the meetings, especially when Palpatine comes up.
Oh yeah, that's in the next one. We're definitely going to talk about Uncle Palps. When Rex appears, it's a great moment. It's a great sequence. He's one. I mean, he's definitely a fan favorite. I think that's fair to say. When we see that hologram of the sniper. Now let's pretend like we've only seen this one. I guess it's at the end of this one we find out the identity of the sniper, isn't it? Yeah. So who did you all think the sniper was going to be at first? Mason, we'll start with you.
I thought it was Crosshair.
Ah, that's right. Now I remember you saying that. Now that you say that, Mary, who did you think it was?
Well, I didn't think it was Crosshair. As a matter of fact, as soon as when he spoke, not really thinking about though that the helmet could modulate his voice.
Sure.
But I even said to Chaz, I don't think that's Crosshair. I'm not even really sure that it's a clone. Is that like a bounty hunter or someone? So I just thought it was somebody like totally out of the blue that we did not know yet.
Right. No, I know. Chaz, what do you think?
Me and my prequel love, I actually was kind of expecting it to be another person like Zorian would be a changeling, and that's why they looked like a clone, a shapeshifter. But unfortunately, it was just a normal clone. But
when you're on Coruscant, that does cross your mind, because it crossed my mind as well. I expected that, or I also expected it would be some sort of a mysterious figure from the legacy of the Clone Wars, or maybe I actually thought maybe it'd be a character from Solo. I thought that would have been really fun too. But it was a clone. Now I think it's important that this is a clone because again, it shows. I mean, this one has no distinctive markings. I think it says his what does it say? His identity, his identifying number was wiped, which we find out in the next episode that Tech didn't even think was a possibility, and Tech would know. But when it's revealed, there's a great suspenseful sequence, a chase action sequence. Rex appears out of the smoke. He's got a long cloak that goes down to his knees. He's got a hood over his head, so it's obviously like a red herring where they want you to think it's a Jedi, or that they want you to think it's Ahsoka, and it was very effective. I see Mason shaking his head. I know he agrees too. And when you find out it's a clone, I think story-wise, it's impactful, at least to me, because it shows that clones have a little bit more agency than we realize. They're making choices. This one we find out right before he takes that capsule and commits suicide that he says that he is a believer. And it's sad because they're getting these brothers to fight against each other. But what are they a believer in? Is it just as simple as the Empire, or is there a bigger story that this clone has been sold by? It's Rampart. We know it's Rampart. What does everybody think about the ending of this and the idea of this thing being a believer?
I'm not sure. Like in my notes, I wrote that and underlined it 2 or 3 times and put an exclamation point beside it. What does "I'm a believer" mean? And who made him a believer? Is that, like you said, is that Rampart, or is that someone else or something else? What type of indoctrination, cult, whatever you might it might be. That was very mysterious. And at one point, I even, through this entire episode, I looked at Chaz and just kind of joked and said, yeah, this is a show for kids. We've got murder, we have suicide. It's a show for kids.
Yeah, it's definitely a much more edgy one. Chaz, any thoughts on that?
I don't. The believer part's definitely out there. It's very open for interpretation. But something that I got reminded of, and I feel like that's the reason why he is a believer, is because they have to have someone very charismatic with a tongue of silver to get them to believe that. It reminds me of the Umbara arc in Clone Wars, where Umbara has the clones fighting each other. That's what it feels like again. It feels like that whole arc where their brothers are fighting brothers. So someone is definitely higher up selling this story to the clones to make them keep fighting for the Empire as long as they can.
And fighting against themselves too. Yeah. Mason, what about you, buddy?
basically what you said. It's crazy because you expect him, like when Rex asks him, you expect him to give more detail. And then when you see him do what he did, you think, oh, that's from The Mandalorian.
Yeah, that's right. It's from the episode where we first meet Bo-Katan. Good memory. The only other thing I think before we wrap up the conversation on this one, Senator Palmlo, Palmlo, I believe I have that correct. If you recognize her from the opening sequence, I love that opening political sequence. There's a lot of drama and tension in it, but you will recognize her from Rogue One. She's one of the people that's with Senator Mon Mothma. So that's pretty fun. I love that they are doing things like that. All right, so let's give a letter grade for this episode, and then we'll move on to Truth and Consequences. Mason, let's start with you.
A and 8/10.
An A and 8/10. Okay. You and your fractions always so clever. Why did you give it that letter grade?
Because I love this one, but it's not as good as the next one.
Okay. Fair enough. That's a reasonable thing. Mary, what about you?
I think a good solid A. It was very Clone Warsy, like Chaz said earlier. It gave us that wall, that Clone Wars memorial wall, and it took us back to Coruscant, and it just kind of gave us those old feels that we had with Clone Wars. But it actually, I think, really started pushing our group into a new direction. And I think even though our group wasn't in this one, I think this is going to help to push them into a new direction.
Okay, very good. Chaz, what about you?
A borderline S.
A borderline S. Tell me about that.
I didn't know what kind of like the letter grade ranking we do here, but I'm used to like, A, B, C, but S is usually above A.
Oh, this is new to me.
It's a ranking, yeah. But that's the kind of the ranking system I use for stuff. Like A is like really high, but S is like usually above exceptional.
Above excellence?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the reason I rank it as that is because it's referred to something else. It's the reason why I liked Andor so much. While it does deal with the clones and there are some returning characters, there are also new characters, and it's very politic heavy, which is something I always enjoyed about Star Wars more than the action was when they got into these galactic politics and all the Senate stuff, especially bringing Coruscant back.
I love that. We've never had an S on the show, so that is a first. I love it. I'm going to give this one an A+ because I try to think of it this way. If two different students handed me a paper, and one was the Clone Conspiracy, and one was Truth and Consequences, and I was blown away by one, and the next one blew me away too, is it fair to one to knock it down because it's not as good as the other one? And for my particular rubric, I'm going to say no. Because I think just the political stuff alone, like you just said, Chaz, is worth the price of admission. I love Star Wars action, of course, but I like the character stuff and the intrigue and the depth that is introduced here. It's really amazing. The way that you can build suspense and invest new story elements that still fit organically into the overall arching mythology and make it actually work and not feel like a gimmick is a stroke of genius. So this is definitely an A+ for me. All right. Let's go ahead and take a quick break. When we return, we'll talk all about Truth and Consequences. I'm Dan Zare, and this is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
We are back talking all about episode 208 of Star Wars Season 2, The Bad Batch, Truth and Consequences. Let's start off this one just like we did before. One word and overall thoughts on the episode. Who would like to start? Mason, you're scratching your nose. Does that mean you want to start?
Yeah.
All right, go right ahead.
Like our word.
Your one word, yes, and overall thoughts.
My one word is accusation.
Okay, tell me
Because-
about it.
Senator Chuchi, she accuses the Empire of ordering an attack on Camino, and it wasn't destroyed by some storm that they always have.
Exactly. All right. Awesome. Good start. Mary, what about you?
I think my word is manipulation. We have Rampart manipulating people all along, which we knew. But also at the end, when Rex says, the Emperor has been 2 steps ahead of us or whatever all along. And so it just seems to go back to, how is Sheevy Baby always manipulating everything that goes on in Star Wars?
Sheevy Baby. I love that. That's also a first for Coffee with Kenobi. Chaz?
It's technically 2 words, but it's also 1 word. War game.
Hyphenated.
Yeah, hyphenated war game.
Attaboy.
It's seeing through the prequels, the Clone Wars, all of Star Wars, up to Episode 6. Everything is basically a giant game of war to Palpatine. It's like he's playing chess. So when, like my mom said, the whole a few steps ahead, and then with Chuchi accusing the Empire and Rampart and getting him arrested, Palpatine comes in and then uses that to get the bill passed anyway. He's just playing this giant game of chess, this war game.
War game is a good word to describe it. My word is ominous. There's a lot of underlying tension, and there's just always this feeling of dread that something is happening, whether they're going on to the Venator? The Venator, is that what they call it?
Venator.
Yeah. Venator, yes. I would love to blame that on my handwriting, but I just think I didn't remember how to pronounce it. Whether it's the tension on aboard that ship, whether it's the concern over what is going to happen, especially when you introduce one of the surviving Kaminoans, and then, of course, the amazing WWE level entrance of Emperor Palpatine at the end of this episode. That, my friends, is very, very ominous. So why don't, Chaz, why don't you kick off the direction for us on this one? Where would you like to take the episode Truth and Consequences?
Ooh.
Anything that stands out to you, or like a main theme, idea, scene that you think is worthy of breaking down?
Well, I'm going to jump to the end of the episode here.
Yeah, please.
I definitely liked, because I could feel it from the beginning of the series, we were going to lose someone, whether that be death or they go off to do their own thing. As much as I hate, I also like seeing Echo go with Rex, because fundamentally Echo was not a part of 99. He wasn't a defective clone. He was not genetically altered in any way. He is a normal clone, aside from, of course, him getting cyborgified. So seeing him go with Rex just felt right, because to him, Rex is much closer to him than I feel the Bad Batch are, because they are from 2 different sides of the
same coin.
Yeah.
Yeah. The ending with Echo, and Mason, I know that you wrote down stuff about this, about Echo leaving with Rex and saying goodbye to Omega. What did you want to talk about with that moment?
It was kind of like a moment between Omega and Echo. It was like, it felt like a final goodbye, but you can tell that it's not.
Right. Did you think it was kind of sad, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
It was sweet. I think it's important that Omega is the one that is extremely wonderfully empathetic. She, of course, embraces Echo, who is, you could argue more machine than man, to coin a popular Star Wars, but he's very human. And at first he's a little taken aback, but then he embraced her. And I thought it was a really, really sweet moment. Mary, anything about that sequence at the end, or the importance of that?
Well, I think we, over this season, these first 5 episodes up to this one, we really saw Echo and Omega form a bond that we did not see in the first season. And so the now foreshadowing of that is, that Echo is gone. But unlike you guys, I did cry when, like tears. I'm sitting there sniffling with Omega, when she's sniffling. But, and him hugging her at the end, was fantastic. But, like Chaz said, it feels right that, and we, even while we were watching it, even as, I guess, as Hunter was walking over to Echo, we're like, oh, Echo's staying with Rex. Like, it was just so evident that, okay, here is now this parting of the ways. But, like Mason said, I don't think it felt like it was a finale, a final goodbye, but I don't think it was a finality type of thing. I think we are going to see them again as we go along. But I think it's also very important for Omega and her growth now that one of them has gone on to do something else. It's just all part of growing up that people leave, and so how does she handle that, and how is that going to affect her future? Because I think it's going to be very I think it's going to affect her in ways that's going to help her to grow.
And the growth is a really important part of that too, because she, as we've been reminded several times over the last few episodes, she's a child. So as you said, Chaz, for Echo, as much as he's a part of the Bad Batch, just like an example of blood family versus surrogate family, I guess, kind of a way to think of it that way. Or not surrogate, but more like
found family.
Found family, yes. And there's a lot of beauty in that. He has connections to both, but he feels like he's been saying since, and I tried not to give this away when we talked about the first episode of season 2, but because we knew this was happening. And there are little Easter eggs, not a ton of them, but Echo very much is like, we need to do something. We need to do something. Well, this is a chance. I've always, you wonder why wouldn't they go with Rex initially? That's because for Hunter and I think for the rest of them, it's about survival. It's about keeping Omega safe. Echo knows that Omega's safe. He also knows that Omega can take care of herself. In fact, in this episode, Hunter doesn't even bat an eye when Omega leaves on Coruscant, which is the heart of the Empire, to go with Senator Chuchi, sort of like is like her little, not apprentice, that's not a good word to use in Star Wars because it has very sinister implications. Assistant, like, or a little like a pledge, or like someone who's like an intern or something like that. And they don't even bat an eye. And I think that's important because they all see her as someone who can very much take care of herself. They're not being overprotective. And this would be the time when you would want to do something like that, especially with all the violence that has happened on Coruscant surrounding this weird, controversial threat of a possible stormtrooper program. So it's really good. So I'm glad you brought it up there because that's a heavy, impactful scene. At the beginning, we learned that Hunter and Echo agree to this mission right away. In fact, Echo is the one who agrees to the mission. Hunter doesn't even look at him weird. He just kind of looks forward because I was really watching for that because they want to help. Now, Hunter is reluctant at first. I don't want to forget about what actually happens. But Rex says, I will give you, a special pathway so that you're safe, and then you get access to a private landing platform. But we got things that we need to do. One of my favorite parts for this is when Senator Chuchi and Bail Organa are talking with Omega and like, are you sure that you can get this done? And Omega says, very. Mason, I know you love that part too.
Yeah, also when she's with Senator Chuchi, the look on her face when she first sees Rampart, when Chuchi is talking to Rampart.
Well, how would you describe that look? Oh, you just put it on the emoji.
Mm-hmm. She's annoyed, up, and frowning.
Annoyed and frowning. In fact, you and I impersonated that look several times at the end of the episode when we rewatched it before talking about it on the show today. Again, we learned that the identifying number was wiped on that mystery bounty hunter. We still don't know the name of that particular clone. We know that there is a mission. You got to go on top of the Rampart ship to go on there's a backup data bank which shows proof that there was not a storm that destroyed Tipocha City and most of the Kaminoans, but it was Rampart himself who ordered people to fire on them, which is why in the clone conspiracy, when I believe it's Kay that says, we aren't bad men, but what we did was wrong. Again, it begs the question, the chip is expired now. What's going on? The point is they do have a conscience. Their conscience is very active, and it very much is pointing them to try to find out what is going on. Now, does anyone remember? This is sort of a trivia question, but not really. Does anyone remember? Because Echo says right away, I'll testify, I'll do it, and Echo is not afraid. Why don't they want Echo to testify?
It's because they're dead.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
To the Empire and everyone else, they were killed on Camino and the attack. They have not had the Empire's heat on them for the past season and half a season, because to Rampart, to the clones, to all the higher ups, Clone Batch 99 was killed on Camino with the rest of the clones and the Kaminoans in that cataclysmic storm.
Right. And not only that, but he says that they are, what does he say? They're disgraced or discharged or something like that.
Deserters.
Deserters. So they wouldn't be given the ethos or the credibility for what they saw, because it would just be easily dismissed by, it's interesting that members of the banking clan from Attack of the Clones are still on in the Senate committee, even with all the destruction they helped to cause. But, that apparently is how the political thing goes. I don't think there's a great screening process for being in the Senate. I think it's fair to say that. So we do find out there is a surviving Kaminoan. Her name is Haley Bertoni. I believe that is correct. And everyone is nodding. So finally I pronounced something correctly. So that's a good, there's hope for me yet, everyone. I'm glad to hear that. She was on the Defense Finance Committee, but she was removed from office. So they finally get to talk with her. There's a great sequence with Haley and Omega and Chuchi. So I think the important thing here is her attitude towards, I feel like Kaminoans are portrayed, well, before I say how they are portrayed, how do you think Kaminoans have been portrayed in the Bad Batch and in Star Wars in general? What do you think, Mary?
I think they're aloof. It's like they're better than others, or they have this ability to do the cloning, and like she was saying, that Lama Su was mistaken in thinking that they would always be needed. So I'm not real sure that Bertoni was looking at it through those rose-colored glasses, maybe like Lama Su was, that she, because she even said, it was an attack was imminent. So with her being the senator for the Kaminoans, then she was probably seeing what was going on Coruscant more so than anybody else. But one of the things that when they came into, when Chuchi and Omega were standing there, and Bertoni came in to the room, and my thought was, did Bertoni know anything about Omega? Did she recognize Omega? There did not seem to be any recognition in her face. So what did she know of both Alpha and Omega? Does she know of these two clones that were not enhanced in any way? So I thought that was interesting. There was not, and then really not really much of a reaction when Omega even admitted that she was a clone. Mm-hmm. So I thought that whole section was kind of interesting for us to see or to wonder how much did each one of the folks on the Camino know about what was really going on in the cloning facility.
Yes, there's a lot to unpack there. Mason, I know you had some things to say about that too.
Mhm. I think when people think of the smartest Star Wars characters, no one's going to mention ones, but they are.
Yeah, and why do you think that is?
I think they are because they can make clones and no one else has ever. But people don't think of them because they're kind of in the background.
Right, and the way that they present themselves, they very much present themselves as apathetic, or like, not, as you said, Mary, not having any, acting like presenting themselves as greater than others, or like being, I mean, they're taller, so they literally are looking down on people, which I would like to think George had it in mind when he was designing the look of these characters too, and how they would act on screen or interacting with other people. But the main idea, because Omega, that's a great scene that you mentioned, Murray, when Omega says, "I'm a clone and I'm angry." And it, sometimes when a little kid says something like that, you kind of like, "Aw," but no, there was nothing awe or cute about it. It's like, it was serious. There was venom there, and Omega never really shows that side. But the fact, again, that she's willing to fight for justice, not revenge, but she wants justice for what happened to her people and her home. And I love that. Did you say something, Mason?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought I heard somebody say something. So that's a really interesting aspect of this, as is her, like, what is the tipping point, do you all think, that makes her decide that she's somewhat interested in helping? Because she does end up helping them. Is there a line? Is there a certain thing that happens that you think makes her decide that she's going to be to help?
I think it's Omega and that little bit of an outburst, that outburst she had towards her, because when she says it's her family too and all that, I think it makes her realize that, like the clones, their home world is basically gone. There are going to be no more.
Mm-hmm.
She's one of the last few Kaminoans. Omega is one of the last clones, and that's why I also I mentioned this to my mom. I think that's why we don't see Kaminoans anymore. And in further Star Wars stuff was the attack on Tipocha City.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely think that's why she decided to help, was because it then hit her that maybe we do need to give a little bit of justice for my people.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And fortunately she does. She becomes a part of it. I haven't said much about the action sequence. Mason, anything you want to say about the action sequence where they get the information from the data banks of the ship?
No, but I think on what Chaz was saying, I think the line is, she says, "You don't need what I need to say, you need actual proof," and Chi-Chi says, "I need both."
Yeah, I need both. And they get it. The only thing I want to say about that action sequence is I love that they use escape pods and text like, just leave it to me. And then when they land, he's like, "Oh, I was 0.46.
6.4 meters off.
Yeah, 6.4 meters off. That is just such a classic tech line. It's a great sequence. Again, Bad Batch is using stun, whereas the clones are using shooting to kill, which we didn't see with the Trandoshans, as we talked about last week on the episode Tribe. Stun was not used, but it is here with their brothers. They're the only ones that we have seen, and Rex is included in this, that they are still thinking of. They're not fighting against their brothers. They're trying to subdue them for the greater good, but they're not trying to eradicate their people like the Empire wants them to do. Ultimately, we find out through a really beautiful sequence where the video shows the Star Destroyer going into Camino and destroying Tipocha City. It's a really beautiful, powerful scene, very haunting. And then we find out, like you said earlier, Mary, to no one's surprise, not only is the Emperor behind it, but as I said, he makes this grandiose, spectacular entrance. It's Ian McDiarmid at his very best vocal performance, growling about, you know what, this is showing me that maybe we do. I can't trust the clones because they went along with perpetuating this crime against their own people. So I guess we're going to have to use stormtroopers now. Of course, I am very playfully paraphrasing this, but it's really it's great because as I think Mary, was it you mentioned that they say, you know what, Palpatine is always 2 steps ahead, and it's so frightening and fascinating to see it all transpire.
Yeah, I think when he came up and Chaz and I looked at each other and I thought, is that Ian McDermott? And because it was just so spot on. But the look on Omega's face, not only when they were showing the video of what was happening to Camino, because she lived it, so she was reliving that trauma, watching that again. But then how she sort of sat back or scooted back into the shadows as Palpatine was speaking. She saw a lot of firsts, as she always does in every episode, but to come to Coruscant for the first time, to see the huge one city planet, to go in and see the Senate, and as Chuchi was showing her and talking about what happened in the Senate and the representation, and then at the end to see the evil that is controlling all of that. The look on her face, the animation of this show just continues to be unreal. They just do such a wonderful job. And I noticed in the credits, Joel Aaron, who is in charge of the lighting, Chaz and I had the pleasure of meeting him on the Star Wars Day at Sea cruise that first year that they did that cruise, and we talked with him, and he's amazing to talk to. And every time it seems like there's some amazing lighting to a scene, we just know in the back of our minds Joel had something to do with that.
Yes.
He's just fantastic. But just the progression of Omega and everything that she sees in these 2 episodes, but to end it with seeing Palpatine and then the loss of, Echo, having to leave without Echo, she's gone through a lot in this very short period of time. And as you said before, they now are thinking of her as part of the crew, as part of this group. They're not overly protecting her. She was the one responsible for bringing that proof to Belle so Belle could give it to Chuchi. So, it wasn't one of the other Bad Batchers. It was her. She was the one who was waiting for that to be taken to the Senate. So, that end of her seeing what is happening, as Chaz was saying, with the inner workings of the government and what's happening with the entire galaxy, I thought that was very interesting. And they just made the animation with her face just so perfect.
It's very lifelike in an animated show, and that doesn't look lifelike, but just the emotions that are emoted from the vocal performance and just the animation, the art style stuff it's so good. It continues to be spectacular. I feel like season 2 has really been a work of art in many, many ways. Well, this has been a good breakdown as well. I'm ready to give a letter grade. Anybody want to say anything that we didn't cover before we wrap up the show?
It's just something I kind of noticed, and I think would be kind of it's more of like a theory-ish kind of thing. Of course, the last episode, we see Gunji again, and in this episode, Omega is meditating, like Gunji taught her.
Yes.
Just thinking of different Star Wars media, I feel like how they're setting up Omega, I feel like it'd be kind of interesting if she ended up being Force sensitive. Because there have been other instances where clones have been known to be Force sensitive. Then, of course, they're Legends material, but
right.
I feel like that'd be kind of interesting.
That crossed my mind, and then the fact that she said, well, I'm not really good at it like Gunji is. And I thought, phew, they're not going to do the Force thing. So I don't know. I don't know. That's definitely a dangling carrot. So I'm glad that you brought it up. So whether that happens or not, it will be very interesting to see. I love that. Well, anybody else, or should we give our letter grades?
Well, I just think one more thing about Hunter is I think he's turning the corner, and he is going to be more willing to help. And him saying to Rex, "Call us when you need us."
Yes,
basically.
Yeah, I like that too. Mason, any last minute things, or are we ready for a letter grade?
I'm ready.
All right, why don't you start us off?
I gave this episode an A and 9/10.
An A and 9/10. Okay, so what made this one almost perfect?
I liked how it was kind of, like you said at the beginning of the show, the mid-season finale.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to my word, accusation, how the ending, how it was made up, and how the Emperor twisted it.
Yes.
So it makes it a 10th better than the last episode.
Okay. Very well said. Very well said. Mary, your turn. And I love that Mary is grading because, Mary is a teacher. You don't stop being a teacher ever.
Retired.
That's right. Retired. But still, it's in the blood.
Yes, it is. Once it's there, it's there. I think this one is an A+. I think there were so many different aspects to it. We saw so many things change, grow, new knowledge. And again, the lighting, the animation, the voice acting, it was right up there with one of the best ones of this season, I think. Definitely an A+.
And Chaz.
Well, I gave the last episode an A, almost S. This one is an S. Like my mom said, the change, the growth, that's all amazing. I love the whole Echo going with Rex to help the clones because that's what he's willing to do. And what really got me to rate this episode so high is Palpatine showing up, and just the score they used it really sold the whole, this is him, this is the shadow itself revealing very briefly to play his war game and then go back away and then let the Senate do everything.
And don't you love that when Palpatine does show up, it's so rare, and he always covers his eye, and he's always wearing that dark hood. It's like he's just openly bragging that he's a Sith and no one can do anything about it. And
he's like, he doesn't care anymore.
He does it with
stop him.
That's right. Not only is he scary, but he does it with this elegance and this civility, this faux civility, which is really terrific. It's an A+ for me too. I mean, of course it is. It's as strong of an episode as the last one. This two-parter is a blockbuster, and this was the finale of the season. I think everyone will be equally satisfied because it just got a lot of great meat on the bone. It's got a lot of great suspense. It expands the plot. It introduces some new wrinkles. It answers some questions by opening up a whole new series of them. And to me, that is when Star Wars is among the very, very best out there in mythology.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
Speaking of among the very best, we've got amazing guest co-host tonight. It was wonderful to hear from all of you. Chaz, you were spectacular. As I always say, yes, you passed the audition. You were certainly welcome back anytime. Mary, of course, you are always my pleasure, pal. Thank you for being here. Mary, always a pleasure to chat with you about Star Wars, about anything really, but it was just really great to have you and your son on the show together. I know Mason and I really enjoyed talking with you. Chaz, if people want to continue the conversation with you, where can they do it?
I don't really use social media like that. I just kind of use it to follow people.
It's smart. But you can occasionally find Chaz in the CWK Cafe. And Mary, what about you?
On Instagram, I'm Mary N. Chazz. And then on Twitter and Facebook, it's at Mary Perdue. But again, I'm there in the CWK Cafe, so that's usually where I'm, putting any information like that or interacting with folks. So anybody who wants to interact with me there, feel free to do so.
And Mary also is on Twitter, and she's also a regular on CWK Live, which we always very much appreciate.
Yes.
And Mason, of course, can be found. If you put the bat signal in the air, he will rush over in the Batmobile. Right, Mace? Oh, sorry, I wasn't supposed to say that. I mean, never mind. He's just Bruce Wayne. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Be sure to get your top 5 ready. We're going to combine them both episodes, The Clone Conspiracy and Truth and Consequences, for next Tuesday. So you can join us on Facebook or on Coffee with Kenobi's YouTube channel. We would love to chat with you. Until next time, on behalf of myself, Mary, Chaz, and Mason, this is Dan Zare. And remember, everybody, this is the podcast you're looking for. Thank you so much.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here.